Windy with a Chance of Grandma by Nicholas Leonard. I was 30 years old when the North Shore area of Massachusetts experienced the most alien windstorm in its history sometime in 2018, and my grandma was 85. It was the whirlwind that made me realize she had a life before mine, that she existed before me, existed before my mom, and was her own person. It was her first time experiencing life too, just like me. Of course, you know your grandma is a person too, but the sobering revelation that she wasn't always your grandmother is intense in a quiet way. It was the windstorm that made me realize that the little girl in the black and white photograph was her. The photograph was taken in 1935, had a dusty brown hue clouding over it, and it showed my grandmother in a dress beside a rocking horse. Her cheeks had the leftover insulation of baby fat, and her mouth was open because the English language was still too big to fit in her mouth. She looked confused in the photograph, like all children universally do before a camera. Whenever I had seen that photograph, which was usually on the kitchen table in my grandma's house, I couldn't bring myself to believe that that was her. How many times I flipped the picture over to read Dorothy, 1935 on the back, and how many times that didn't solidify that it was her. Dorothy Springfield was born in 1933 during the Great Depression, and there had been times when she talked to me as if she remembered every second of it. But I find that hard to believe as well when I see the picture of that little girl.
Mom would have me put the clothes on the line while Dad was at the pond fishing for eels for supper,
she told me. I mean, maybe she remembered the final years of the Depression, but I just couldn't believe it.
My hands used to get so cold while putting up the laundry,
she mused wonderfully.
I would stand on buckets to reach the clothing line. That was my chore. That was how I helped out.
She had my baby pictures on the fridge, and I had a better inclination that was me in the past, compared to my inclination that the little girl in the photograph was my grandmother. Some stories of hers that I remember include one where she crashed her first car in 1950, and another when she broke her arm in the 40s as a teen, but didn't want to tell her parents because she feared they'd be mad at her. She did eventually tell them when she couldn't get the clothes on the line. And then she became old, but adapted to the modern world, spending the evenings multitasking games of poker on her phone and an e-book on her tablet. Yes, she had occasional phone troubles that I helped her with, but she, for the most part, knew how to navigate technology. I, after all, can't say I ever put clothes out on the line. I liked my grandmother's stories. Were they my grandma's stories or Dorothy Springfield's stories? I saw her in the flesh and saw the photographs of her as a toddler, her in that new car she crashed, her in a wedding dress with my Elvis look-alike grandfather. But there always remained this intangible disconnect between Grandma and Dorothy Springfield. To her, I was all one person, grandbaby Roland Springfield. To me, she was Grandma, not Grandma Dorothy Springfield. I wonder if my grandma found some similarity between the news on the TV that day and the radio broadcasts about dust storms she might have listened to as a little girl. Whatever it was, It puzzled the meteorologists. Still, they read the weather and circled their hands over the radar map, which was tracking the windstorm. Oddly enough, there hadn't been any rain despite the cloudy disposition outside. The day outside was thick with greyness, and the trees along the border of the neighbor's house were having their branches tested by the wind, waving one way, then waving another, with their leaves possessed with the cadence of a million uncoordinated jazz hands. We watched the news while the windstorm was underway outside. One clip showed an old lady who looked like Susan B. Anthony crossing the street, shuffling along with her walker before being flipped up into the air with her whole entire body spinning like a punted football. The old lady was not identified, and unfortunately, she was not the only one. And we all knew that their walkers weren't going to help them up there. I remember they showed footage of staff at the local nursing home nailing boards of wood across the windows. They even got up on ladders to board up second-story windows. They said that the nursing home's third-floor occupants were evacuated to the first and second floors in a rush. Airplanes weren't grounded because of the wind, but grounded because of one close call pilot Captain Milton had while circling over suburbs outside of Boston before coming into land. On the news, they played the audio of Captain Milton reporting his sighting to air traffic control of an old lady being sucked through some current of wind, just narrowly missing the side of the plane. Many passengers who had their windows open corroborated the report. The news reporter, a young Asian American woman, held our attention while she spoke.
First responders and witnesses in the area remain baffled by the unexpected weather and even more baffled by who the unprecedented winds seem to affect.
They cut to a clip of another elderly woman being dragged up into the sky and carried over rooftops of a residential neighborhood in Lynn. It cut back to the news lady, who continued speaking.
Authorities warn that female members of Massachusetts' elderly population might be at risk of being blown away. If you or a loved one you know may be over the age of 60, Massachusetts law enforcement and first responders are suggesting that you refrain from stepping outside until the wind speeds settle down. With that, I'm Antoinette Antonelli, Channel 5 News.
I turned the TV off and looked at my grandma. For the first time in 8 decades, the English language was just too big to fit in her mouth, so I tried cracking a joke. "How old are you? 59, Grandma?" The wind landed a punch against the side of the house, as if it knew she was inside. She spoke as if I never made the joke at all.
"Roland, dear, what it look like outside in the park?"
I blinked. I was a little worried, but I got up and looked out the window anyway to check the park that was across the street. My eyes widened when I saw an old woman in jogging attire holding onto the fence at the park while her feet hovered in the air. She had on green neon wristbands and a pink neon headband. I couldn't quite see her face because her entire body was at a 90-degree angle while the wind was trying to rip her off the fence. But I knew she had to have been at least 60 because of the 1980s style of jogging wear she had on.
"What do you see, Roland?"
My grandma squeaked from behind me. The wind was just too much. I watched the elderly jogger being vacuumed up into the air. "Nothing, Grandma," I lied.
"Does anybody need our help?"
"Our help?" I said in a kind of surprised hiss. I turned around and saw my grandma was unfortunately serious.
"You're a strong young man.
She had always believed this since I was a lanky middle schooler.
And I am nimble and...
You're many things, Grandma, I said, walking away from the window, but she continued speaking.
Can we go out there and help guide any lost stragglers inside? People shouldn't weather this wind alone.
I couldn't hold back the disappointment in my face.
Either you help me, or I'm going out there alone.
You heard the news, though, Grandma, I snapped urgently. You can't go out there.
I can't go out there alone,
she said matter-of-factly. Okay, I said breathlessly, noticing the determination in my grandma's eyes. We'll go out there, but we're going to do it my way. I'm going to tie a rope or something to my waist and tie the other end to yours. We'll look around, and if we can't find anyone, then we'll go back inside. I could tell she didn't like the going back inside part, but there was stubborn agreement in her eyes.
Roland!
My grandma squealed while we trudged out onto her front lawn. I twisted my torso in order to hold onto the rope behind me because I could feel the wind trying to take my grandma away. She was holding onto the rope in front of her. There was something so infantile about her. She was not holding onto a rope. She was not holding onto a clothing line from 80 years ago, but she was holding onto an umbilical cord. I had to speak just to snap myself out of whatever trance this realization was about to put me into. Come on, Grandma. I wanted to shout, but I just couldn't. For all that talk inside the house, she was just so frail. Still, she trudged behind me, while the wind threatened to pull the very silver hair out of her scalp, while it barely tousled mine. We crossed the street where the smell of peppermint was stale in the air. Somebody's laundry was running loose in the air above, with the sleeves of a red sweater flapping in its wake. We walked along the fence which the old jogger had been holding on to, and we entered the park through a gate. The playground was abandoned, and its swing set squeaked in the wind. The baseball diamond was also abandoned, and though no kids were playing soccer in the field, the soccer net was still catching volleys of wind. It looked as if 1,000 invisible soccer balls were being hurled into the net. My grandma saw it before I did.
Oh my goodness!
She squeaked. It was Belinda, one of the women in my grandma's book club. Her little lapdog named Mop was working his tiny legs across the grass, yapping up into the wind while his leash dragged along. When I looked up, I saw what he was chasing and barking at. His owner, Belinda, 78 years old, was floating away. Mop was chasing after her, even though he had no chance of catching her. She had her arms outstretched, snow angel style. The wind rolled her up, taking her over the playground where Mop followed, and she vanished up and away.
Belinda!
My grandma called. Come on, Grandma, I urged. We carried on as the sounds of Mop yapping faded out behind us. Grandma, look out! I shouted as a mobility scooter came crashing out. It just narrowly avoided us, but the impact shook the ground enough to make my grandma lose her balance. I went back and helped her up.
Roland!
Her voice starting like an engine.
Roland!
At first I was confused until I saw what was happening with the balls of her feet. They were lifting up off the grass. She slapped her hands down on my shoulders. Alarm was in her eyes.
Roland!
She squealed. The rest of her started slowly hovering off the grass. Her fingers slipped off of my shoulders, and now the only thing keeping her from floating away was the rope that connected us.
Grandma!
I started tugging on the rope, tugging and pulling it into my side, but the wind demanded her. I was playing a tug-of-war of mythical proportions with a gale, and my grandma was at stake. I watched her hold out her arms in front of her, keeping her arms up and out as much as her joints and bones would allow, while some invisible force seemed to be suctioning on her back and trying to vacuum her away. An old lady tumbled by in the distance above her shoulder. I started digging my feet through the grass, beginning the trek back to Grandma's house, while my grandma floating above me like a float from the Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade. Her voice was becoming a part of the wind.
Roland!
Closer and closer to the gate. I was getting closer to the gate.
Roland!
Another old lady came barreling through the air and grabbed onto my grandma.
Please,
The old lady spoke hoarsely to my grandma.
you gotta help me.
I could feel the addition of this other old lady having a negative effect on the rope. For some reason, the wind must have thought two old ladies were much better than one. So now it was pulling even harder. But now I was in the street, and I was getting closer to Grandma's house.
Roland's my grandson.
My grandma told the old lady who was clinging to her.
He's gonna take us back to my house. He's a good boy.
I was in the driveway, my feet suddenly gaining the speed of snails. I was approaching the front door, but the weight of two old ladies was just too much. The rope's many veins began to undo themselves until it snapped.
Grandma!
I called as I watched my grandma and the other old lady recede into the sky. They separated from each other and circled each other, moving like figure skaters that lost their minds, going in a vortex, circling the drain of the windstorm until they shrunk in the distance. The wind was only bothering my hair. It didn't care about me. I gulped and looked at the thick pearl sky for a while, waiting for it to give my grandma back to me. But it never did. I must have stood outside my grandma's house for an hour that windy day, just thinking, just waiting. For some reason, that was when my grandma and Dorothy Springfield morphed into one whole person. The wind roared as if it was applauding itself. Something up there was satisfied with itself. How many other grandmas were now being slingshotted through the air currents far away, where the wind returned to? Where the wind stirred the amalgamation of old ladies? How many grandmas, old women, were being lost in wind and time? I knew one thing for sure. One of them was not going to be lost to time, even though she blew away.